This episode is all about us girls, full of the things we girls like. Like, look! Animal crackers, chocolate, candles, and most importantly, no bras. So girls, I know I probably rubbed a lot of you the wrong way when I said that in most churches, not all, men are leaders and women get to be wives and mothers, preferably both. I know that all of you church-going women are bold, mighty women of God who do amazing service for the church as well as all the people in your life. And if you are an actual wife or mother, your work is multiplied, and for that, I applaud you. But being a woman who was raised in the church from infancy, I do think it's worth pointing out how much marriage and qualities of godly womanhood are harped on for us, and starting at a much earlier age than it happens for boys. And look, I get it. I was a young teenage church girl. I went to bed and prayed for my future husband, even though I had no idea who it was, so it was like trying to decipher the perfect prayer for a total stranger. Me and my friends would work for months on making long lists of qualities we wanted in our future husbands. And we would speculate about what celebrities were really secretly Christians and which definitely weren't, and then weigh that on whether it was okay to have crushes on them or not. And some of these admittedly wackadoo practices were just because we were young and full of hormones, but some were endorsed by our church and religious school. But I can't say that the church ever discouraged us from thinking who we were inevitably going to marry. And look, I went to a pretty conservative church, but I didn't go to a super conservative church. Sure, we did a virginity pledge when we went through a pretty rigorous catechism, but we didn't have a purity ball or a ceremony in front of everyone.
Choose before God to cover my daughter as her authority and protection in the area of purity.
I also never witnessed a live demonstration of the chewing gum metaphor for women who have sex outside of wedlock.
Well, when you say it, it doesn't sound like much, but when you're sitting there with 19 Hershey's Kisses in front of you, that's a lot of chocolate.
And for some bizarre reason, I Kissed Dating Goodbye by Joshua Harris was never recommended reading for me. I don't know if our Southern non-denominational church just missed the whole fad, or if we made a conscious effort to not read it because the premise sounded nonsensical. One of the reasons I think my church had this kind of egalitarian feel was because our pastor at the time was very vocal about his love and admiration for his wife. And it wasn't because she was a homemaker or submitted well, but it seemed purely out of his deep-seated respect for her and her identity as a prayer warrior and a strong woman of faith. And he would speak about this from the pulpit. And then when his son took over as lead pastor, he seemed to have a similar relationship to his own wife, where they were regularly identified as a partnership rather than a leader and his wife. I certainly never heard anyone go on and on about the dangers of women getting a full-time job or holding a political office. But even if we have a plethora of positive American Christian marriage models, I still think, just between us girls, that there's still a specific emphasis on it for us. I can't remember ever seeing my male friends filling up notebooks with qualities they wanted in a future partner. I don't believe they were ever sat down and taught to start preparing their hearts for a marriage that was probably 10, 15 years in the future. I know they were taught to be on the watch for women outside the church who wanted to date them.
You should absolutely, definitely not be dating a non-Christian.
But that came with the promise that a nice Christian girl would actually be their forever spouse.
Is it a difficult transition from premarital no sex, no sex, no sex mindset to post-marriage, which is all the sex you want?
Well, and I mean, I get it to a certain extent. You have to give your audience what they want. If a teenage girl wants to fantasize about being married, because with marriage comes not just sex, but intimacy, romance, maybe even a little independence, because then you get your own house where you get to make the rules and decorate, because girls love that. We do. I mean, Girl Defined got a lot of flack because so many of their videos were like rated G Cosmo listicles, but those videos were really popular. You know, it's a little degrading to judge human beings against a short list of isolated qualities, but it clearly was filling a want for their audience.
Guy number 3 that you definitely shouldn't date, court, or marry is Mr. Struggle.
We are all Mr. Struggle. And look, let's be real. The stakes for women in marriage are high. I mean, anyone getting married to the wrong person is going to have a really hard time for a while. But in heterosexual relationships, women are still the ones most likely to be raped, kidnapped, or murdered by their partner and/or husband in the event of an argument or a breakup. Also, because men still make more money or have access to higher paying jobs, many women still find themselves trapped in relationships with destructive partners simply because they cannot afford to leave, especially if they need to provide for their children. So it may not be for pure subjugation that we encourage girls to meditate day and night on what a good, healthy relationship means to them. It may also be a matter of survival, because if you can finally tune a young girl's bullshit detector early on in life, you will definitely spare her a lot of grief in the future. I mean, it kind of robs her of her innocence to know the possible horrors that lie ahead, but when the possibilities are so disastrous. But I'll even read articles targeted at me, an adult married Christian woman, and it's honestly difficult to find an article written to my demographic that talks to me and my walk with God, independent of my identity as a wife. I could even click on an article that largely is about what God may be calling me to do as a person, but there's usually some reference or allusion to family and kids and whether or not I'm working in and outside the home, even if it's in passing. And it's not necessarily judgmental, whichever way you swing, but the fact that Christian articles directed at women feel the need to comment, to bring our family and spouse into it, and okay whatever decision we've made, kind of clues us in, whether we like it or not, whether we feel it or not in our everyday lives, that we're kind of cast in that role. Even if we're young, even if we're not dating, we're still very much seen as future wives and mothers. And don't get me started on this burden of being a godly wife, right? Like, good night. I thought it was hard enough just trying to be a Christian in this messed up capitalist world called America when it was just one-on-one me and Jesus, you know? Now I'm married and I've got to reconcile that identity to fit this concept of being not just a good wife and partner, but a godly one. I'm already trying to mirror Christ in this world, and Jesus wasn't married. How am I supposed to jump through all these hoops? I mean, I read Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 31, King Lemuel's the wife of noble character, inspired by his mother. And I like it. I feel seen. No matter how the transformed wife cherry-picks snippets out of it and misconstrues it to somehow fit how women shouldn't work, if you read it as written, the wife of noble character can only exist in a world that's pretty down with feminism. Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. Gosh, it's too long to read.
But I want you to notice in Proverbs 31, this is God's ideal woman, is obviously an equal partner in the relationship, the marriage relationship. It's not a picture of a domineering husband and a passive wife. This Proverbs 31 woman is a successful businesswoman and a community philanthropist. It says in the scripture, verses 16, 18, and 20, she considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard.
And look, I don't pretend that there's any sort of agreement between the various men writing in the Bible about the woman problem. Paul is a mess of contradictions. The whole noble wife spiel is in Proverbs, the same book of the Bible where 24 chapters earlier, one of the markers of an adulterous woman is that her feet never stay at home and she goes out at night. I mean, I love karaoke. What am I supposed to do? Sing in front of my stuffed animals like I'm 12? Also, King Lemuel, totally fine with the wife of noble character clothing her household in scarlet and owning a fashion line. Meanwhile, you've got Peter, who's all, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine clothes. Rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. Good night! It's almost like a bunch of guys in the Bible had opinions on women's fashion and decided to make it law. And now we girls have to spend a bunch of mental energy trying to decipher if modesty culture is about wearing name brands or short skirts, or whether we deserve to be locked in the music room closet by the choir director who thinks we look very mature in our button-down shirts. And I don't think my husband has any of this stress, because the term godly husband just isn't used in our vernacular. He's the head of the household, so for him to fill that role, he just needs to exercise basic leadership skills. But how is he not confused? Jesus was never a husband, but he was a servant who washed his followers' feet in the ultimate act of servitude, so how is a husband supposed to be a leader who's as humble as Jesus while I'm submitting to him, but also being served? Gosh, look at me. I wanted to have a sit-down conversation just between us girls, and here I am talking about men. How does this happen? I honestly think it's a bit counterproductive to keep putting women and men on different sides of Christianity when it comes to marriage. I mean, after all, God doesn't see us according to our chromosomes. I mean, even Paul, who didn't let women speak in his church, Paul says this: "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus." He's pretty much following Jesus' teaching here and eradicating all distinctions we hold dear. There's no race in God's eyes, there's no class, there's no biological sex even. We are all made ferociously equal through Christ. And just like men don't have to get circumcised anymore to be considered true children of God, and women never had to get circumcised at all, why are we still so desperately obsessed with defining and redefining roles that separate us, rather than all talking to each other as what we are? Genderless equals. I mean, if we're supposed to be concentrating on the things of eternity, you know what's not an eternity? Marriage. Jesus says that himself. Jesus replied, "You are in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven." Dang, when I hear that, I am flabbergasted at all of the hours I have given to dreaming, preparing, researching, and then fitting into a construct that will not even exist past this life. If we're supposed to store up our treasures in heaven, why are we fixated on laser focusing women onto a struggle that is only of this world? And look, I'm with a lot of you. I love marriage. It works for me. It works for my husband. And we have spent a lot of time in therapy figuring out how to make it work better and better every year. But I think I have to admit that Paul is, surprisingly, absolutely right about how marriage can actually get in the way, or be an added obstacle in your walk with God. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. I often think about what good I could have maybe done in the world, or how I could have prepared myself better if all the mental energy I spent thinking about my unknown husband or future marriage had just been focused on praying about God's unfettered plan for my life. Because I didn't get married until I was 30, and I have to say, while I was always devout, I didn't really start meditating on God's super special, unique plan for my life until sometime after college. And it's not that that time was wasted, but I think I could have used it a lot better, especially when I was in a super liberal arts college filled with people who could have used the love of Jesus. And I spent a lot of time avoiding parties and friendships because I was afraid there might be drugs involved. I was the 2% that the DARE campaign was effective on. Maybe if someone had encouraged me to pray for God's will to be revealed in my life more than for the welfare of my future husband, my heart would have been prepared to actually go out and participate in the world, rather than just awkwardly look in from the outskirts of it. And because in some churches, not all, but some, men usually get the rah-rah, be all you can be. God wants to use you exactly how you are. You want to be president? Great. You want to be a rock star? Be a Christian one and it's great. You want to be a quiet, unassuming family doctor in a small community? Awesome. Here's a footsteps in the sand poster for your lobby. But as American Christian women, we don't always feel that sense of freedom to do and be everything God has put in our hearts, because eventually, if we get married, we'll also have to submit. But maybe if we stopped categorizing our roles in the church based on our genitals, we'd find a liberation of talent and abilities and passion that God can actually use to reach the world in new, innovative ways. It can also take the pressure and guesswork off purely male leadership, because now everyone with leadership ability can contribute and bear the burden. Because this obsession with who belongs where and who should submit to who can start to feel like a class struggle, and granting people permissions and honors and access based on their class is definitely a product of this world. And as Christians, I do believe we are called to be set apart from worldly thinking. Even thinking as ingrained as, well, sure, men are supposed to lead women. It's just normal. Because as Jesus says, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. So even within marriage, the whole center of the submission argument, Jesus, as he often does, offers a revolutionary third option in the gender debate. That you're not a separate husband and wife. You're not a man and a woman. You're each other. You're one. So go forth and treat each other as if you are one. Because as crazy as it is to say, the only thing that is really going to relieve the tension of the church is equality between members regardless of their sex and gender. We're only going to all be able to fulfill God's will if we allow each other to be whatever we're called for. And honestly, whatever we're called to do is going to be hard enough. Let's be cool with Christian home workers and presidents, regardless if they're a man or a woman. I honestly think it's what Jesus would do.